All right. Well, welcome everyone. Good evening. I hope you're got a nice cool drink and are ready for the sunset, which might be brilliant because of all the smoke in the air. But once again, welcome to Seward Park Audubon Center's presentations. So I'm Joey Manson, and I have the privilege of being the director of the Seward Park Audubon Center. And we host these presentations that connect researchers, writers, artists, and newsmakers with our audience of people who care and enjoy the natural world. I want to thank you for all of us, for everyone attending. And I also want to thank all of our volunteers who helped put this together and all the people who provided gifts to help us with financial support. Now it's my pleasure to welcome the host for this evening. This is our presenter tonight. Will be introduced in a moment, but right now we're going to talk about our special guest who's going to be the MC of the evening. It's my pleasure to welcome a person who was a board of director from Seward Park Audubon Center in Audubon, Washington, from 2011 to 2018. And at that point, he served as the board chair. He currently leads the Seward Park Audubon Center's Center Committee. So he's really doing a great job of advising how the programs are dispensed through what we do in Seward Park in South Seattle. He and his wife have 3 boys. They live in the Seward Park neighborhood for 12 years. And when he's not enjoying time with his wife and kids, he works as a sustainability advisor for Seattle Parks and Recreation and works on issues from climate change to connecting children with the nature in Seattle. So this person is Todd Burley, and I consider him a friend and a great companion in terms of getting people in the outdoors. He also wanted to mention that his favorite bird, he doesn't have one, but the Pacific wren would be at the top of his list if it was. And I want to ask him, Todd, is that because of the song of the Pacific wren, which is a particularly unusual and really long song, or any other reason?
No particular reason, Joey, except for they're small, they're loud, and they're really hard to find. And I just find them to be beautiful in a way that is understated. And I think it's pretty fantastic that we can walk into a place like Seward Park and still be able to hear such wildness around us. So thank you for the introduction, Joey. And it is my distinct honor to introduce Linnea Westerlind today. I've had the honor of getting to know Linnea over the last few years through my work at Seattle Parks and Recreation on the city's Connecting Children to Nature initiative. And throughout that time, she has been a fantastic and just all-in participant to try to find ways to increase equitable access to nature for children in Seattle, which is exactly what the Seward Park Audubon Center has done for more than a decade. And Seward Park Audubon Center is in such an amazing location, both for its natural diversity as well as its cultural diversity. And it is a place like that that allows children and people of all ages to connect to nature. So it's been a real honor for me to move into the neighborhood, to get to know folks at the center, to get to know the natural environment at Seward Park, and to be involved in helping create those connections. And I hope that you've had a chance yourself to be connected as well. So let me tell you a little bit about Linnea. This is almost like being at a wedding and trying to tell an embarrassing story, but I don't have any. She is fantastic. Linnea, as you know, is the author of Seattle's parks. She has literally visited every single one of Seattle's parks. And that's, as I know very well, working there, that is 485 or more parks out there. So that is quite a feat just to be able to get out there to all of them. As I mentioned, she's also been involved in the city's Connecting Children to Nature initiative and has done this of her own will and free time. So it's just fantastic that she has done it. She also wrote the website Year of Seattle Parks to complement her book. So check it out at yearofseattleparks.com. It's a free resource of more than 500 local and regional parks. And in addition to that, if there can be even more, she is the co-founder of a vibrant Facebook group called Outdoor Childhood Puget Sound. And that's an effort to inspire and provide resources for families that want to spend more time outside, whether it's in the city or beyond. And she volunteers in many other capacities to advocate for parks, play, and the outdoors. In her spare time, when she's not doing all these wonderful things, she's a nonprofit communications consultant, and she has lived in the Northwest all her life and currently lives over in West Seattle with her family. It is just a distinct honor to welcome you, Linnea, to this event for Seward Park Audubon Center. And I'd like to open it up to you and then just let everyone know that after Linnea's presentation, which will be riveting, I'm sure, we'll have a chance for question and answers. And while I have a few that I'd like to ask, I think we're more interested in your questions. So please utilize the Q&A bar that will be available to you to put your questions down, and then I'll be responding to Linnea with some of those questions, and we'll have a chance to have a conversation with you and with her. So once again, thank you, Joey. Thank you to the Seward Park Audubon Center in Audubon, Washington. And Linnea, take it away.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for your patience, and thanks for joining me this evening to talk about nature and parks. It is a strange weather situation outside with this really hot weather and smoke. So I hope everybody's doing okay and staying hydrated. And I guess maybe it's a good evening to stay inside and out of the smoke, which is something I really never recommend. So usually I say go outside. So thanks for tuning in. Thank you, Joey and Seward Park Audubon Center for hosting this and many other great virtual programs. They are still finding lots of ways to reach out and connect people to nature during this pandemic. Such a great organization. And thank you, Todd from Seattle Parks, for that introduction. And I'm glad that you couldn't think of any embarrassing moments to share. So I'm spared on that one. Well, like Todd mentioned, I grew up in the Seattle area. I'm a West Seattle resident. And tonight, I'm just excited to talk about some of the ways that we can connect to nature in our parks. I'm going to share some of my favorite secret parks that you can unwind in during this pandemic, and also just some resources and ideas for, getting through fall and winter during this very strange time. We are going to have Q&A at the end, as Todd mentioned, so definitely feel free to pop your questions in the Q&A feature there, and Todd will be taking a look at those. Well, first, I just like to start out by reminding people how amazing Seattle's park system is. Just for some perspective, more than 12% of all the land in our city are parks, which is actually more than 6,400 acres. Seattle has 15 parks that are bigger than 100 acres, including the beautiful Seward Park. We have 24 miles of shoreline that are open to everyone. And 96% of Seattleites live within about a half mile of a park, which is about a 10-minute walk. So that's pretty cool. You can see all the green spaces on this map. More than 80 of our parks were designed or influenced more than 100 years ago by the renowned Olmsted Brothers landscape firm. And of course, that's the same firm that designed New York's Central Park. This is Volunteer Park in about 1926. I think it's a really cool old photo. Well, just some quick background on me and how I became such a park nut. I grew up, doing a lot of hiking and skiing and spending time outdoors with my family in the Seattle area. And my husband and I did a lot of backpacking and traveling before we had kids. But it was really when my oldest son was a baby that my passion for parks started. The idea just popped in my head to try to visit all the parks in the city in 1 year. And so I headed out with my son, and I just thought it would be a good goal for myself. And so I set up this little blog, Year of Seattle Parks, and just kind of headed out, realized quickly that it was a little ambitious to try to visit more than 400 parks in a year. So it ended up taking me just under 4 years to finish. And part of the reason was I also had twins in there, so they came along. But I just loved visiting parks. It just became such a passion for me. It got me outside regularly, both with my kids and on my own, enjoying solitude. I had a great time going to new corners of the city, places I had never even explored before. And I just found that parks were such a good way to get to know your city in an even a better way. And I have to say that during this pandemic, parks have just been a lifesaver for me and for my family. So why does nature matter? There's a lot of research out, especially in just the past few years, about the benefits of nature and the outdoors. And there are so many reasons that I can't even name them all, but there are a few that I want to mention because I think they're really relevant to what we're experiencing right now as we deal with the stress of this pandemic. One thing is that time in nature has been shown by research to actually reduce stress and anxiety. It also has been shown to boost the immune system, and it can even lower blood pressure. And in fact, some doctors have even started writing prescriptions for nature This was a recent issue of Outside Magazine that I just loved. Science's newest miracle drug is free. And of course, they're talking about nature. There are also a lot of benefits that have been shown in kids. There's been research that shows that kids that spend time outdoors or in nature have better academic results. They are less anxious and stressed, also, same as adults. They can pay attention longer in school. They have fewer behavior problems, and they actually even tend to have better social skills as well. So I have found that one surprising upside of this pandemic has been that it has really reinforced how much we need nature and the outdoors. I was just really kind of surprised, but also happy to see how many people were going to parks and walking their neighborhoods right away in the spring at the start of this pandemic. And I think it's just become really clear that parks are such important assets, and we need these natural spaces to help us cope with so many things that we're faced with today. Well, the first thing I want to do is just talk a little bit about some ways that we can use our parks to connect with nature. And, you know, none of these are really like groundbreaking ideas, but just some fun things. Sometimes when the weather changes at the end of summer, it can be a little harder to get ourselves outdoors. So these are just some ideas to consider checking out, trying. One is to try some bird watching. Of course, Seward Park Audubon Center is a great resource for that. They do birding programs, and the National Audubon Society is awesome for a lot of great birding as well. But you really don't need to be a professional birder or even really know about birding to enjoy watching birds. I am one of those people that just cannot remember the name of a single bird. So I'm glad that Joey didn't ask me what my favorite bird is, because I probably couldn't even name one. They just kind of go in one ear and out the other. But I still love watching birds. One of the first things I did early on in the pandemic was put up a bird feeder outside my dining room window. And as I was sitting, working, and dealing with the early stresses of COVID, I just found it so peaceful to look out the window and see which birds were visiting my bird feeder. So it's just an easy way that you can enjoy a little bit of nature. There are also great books and resources that you can buy if you're interested in learning more about birds. I also found that it's a really great activity for all ages. So my mom and my kids have actually been doing a lot of birding together during these past 6 months. They've been watching birds through my mom's kitchen window and identifying them and drawing pictures of them and having a lot of fun. There's even some apps that you can use to try to learn different bird calls. So it's really fun for all ages. Another idea is to take an evening owl prowl walk, either around your neighborhood or in one of the bigger parks. In my neighborhood of West Seattle, we have an owl pair that live in Lincoln Park, and you can often hear them there or in and around that part of the neighborhood. Another couple of places that I really like to go for birding, one is the Washington Park Arboretum, and this picture is taken at the Japanese garden there. But another great place that's close by is the Center for Urban Horticulture at the University of Washington. This is a great place to go hiking or walking in the fall and winter when the weather changes, and it's a really good place for bird watching. Well, another fun activity is exploring our low tides. You know, this is a really fun thing, obviously, to do in the summer. In the summer, we had some fantastic low tides, so that was very fun. But you can enjoy our shorelines year round, and you actually don't even need to go at the lowest of the low tide. There's always something interesting to see. And in fact, sometimes the high tides can be very exciting, especially on days with some exciting weather. But you can, learn to identify some of the critters that you find. The Seattle Aquarium has a great program where volunteer naturalists will go down to some of our biggest beaches and help identify what you spot in and around the water. The Orca Network is also a great resource, and they help us learn about the whales that live in and around the Puget Sound. You may have been lucky enough to see some of the orcas that have been showing up just in the last week or so, kind of between Vashon and Seattle at that end of the sound. I know a couple of people in West Seattle who were out paddleboarding about 10 days ago or so, and they were shocked to have orcas come up really close to them while they were paddleboarding. It was just incredible to see their picture. Well, another fun activity to do is to go star or moon gazing in the city. And even with our urban light pollution, it's still possible to see quite a bit in the sky. And I actually find that this time of year is a great time for stargazing because we get shorter days, so we get a little bit earlier sunsets, and the sky is Usually pretty clear this time of year. So, you know, not right now with the smoke, but when the smoke hopefully clears soon, September and October are really great times for looking at the stars. You can check the forecast, try to time it with some clear nights. One thing that's fun to do is to look for the International Space Station. NASA has a fun website where you can look up when the space station is going to be crossing over your part of the sky. And if you time it right, you have to get out there right on time, otherwise you'll miss it because it crosses over very, very quickly. But it's super fun to spot, and kids love this activity too. You can even get text message notifications when it's going to be overhead in your area at the right time when it's dark enough to see. Just kind of looks like a sort of fast and bright satellite in the sky. You can also, sometimes it's hard to see the stars coming out, but we can often see planets this time of year. I saw Mars when the moon was rising a few nights ago. It was really beautiful. And there's also a lot of great apps that you can, if you really want to learn constellations, they can help with that. And they'll also point out the planets. So if you're wondering, like, is that a star? Is that a planet? They can help you do that. Well, I also want to just share some tips for families. There may be some parents or grandparents listening. And so just a few things that you can do to get your kids outside year round. One is that you can go to the beach year round. It's really just so much about the right clothing. If you've got rubber boots and, you know, rain gear, kids can be outside for long periods of time in almost any weather, as long as they're dry and warm. So if you've got, you know, if you've got the right gear, if you can get a hold of some used gear, you can enjoy being outside. You can go to the beach. Another fun thing to do, especially with little ones, is to go outside and look for insects. You can use a mesh net to just really gently catch them and then release them. Older kids can learn new skills outside, like how to use a pocket knife. You can find a stick in a park and practice whittling it. It's a good thing to learn how to use safely. You can also teach kids how to tie different types of knots. That's something I am personally working on. You can also go for family walks and just make a family habit of it. It's really a lot easier if it's just part of your regular routine. It could be a walk at lunchtime when the kids are taking a break from their remote learning right now. It could be a bike ride or an evening walk. We've done, you know, I feel like you have to be kind of creative. So, you know, if you let your kids pick the route, that can help. We've also done fun things like flipped a coin at every intersection. And if it's heads, we would go left. And if it's tails, we'd go right. And you just sort of see where you end up. And kids think that's pretty fun. You know, it's also just, you know, I want to say it is hard to tear kids away from screens and video games and all the distractions that are inside right now. So I found that you just kind of need to think like a kid. And so I liberally use bribes as treats for brides in order to get outside. So, you know, a piece of candy for a hike, or we've done like hot cocoa walks. You can microwave a marshmallow and turn it into a s'more and go for an evening s'more walk. S'mores are better to be eaten outside anyway because they're so sticky. So kids love that, and that just makes it more fun to get outside. There's also a great app for identifying plants called Seek. And that can be really fun just to kind of get kids to explore what they're seeing outside. Another thing about the pandemic is there's just so much monotony to our routines. We're sort of stuck inside so much and stuck to the same things. So one thing that can be fun to do is just to find a new park or a new urban trail. This is East Portal Viewpoint, which is a really cool viewpoint that looks out over I-90. And so just finding something new that you've never seen before once a week could be a fun thing to do in the fall or winter. And that actually leads me into what I want to talk about next, which is some of my favorite secret parks, in addition to that one you just saw at East Portal. But before I do that, I want to just talk a couple of safety tips during the pandemic, because this has come up a lot. I know people are wondering how to stay safe. So first, I really believe that everybody should bring a mask with them when they go outside. Even if you just have it around your neck, if you think that, you know, anyone's going to be around you, if you're going to be in a crowded area or you're passing anywhere near other people, just always have that mask ready so you can put it on. There are still a lot of older folks and people with compromised immune system that still really want and need to be out and enjoy our parks also. So that just helps keep everybody safe. It's also probably a good idea to avoid the busiest parks, especially our beautiful city, huge parks, which we love. But they are very popular on the weekends. And I know the Parks Department has been doing their very best to keep as much open at parks as possible. But, you know, avoiding those on Saturday afternoons is a good idea. Find the smaller, quieter park or go to a park during the week or in the morning. All right, well, I want to share some of my favorite parks to enjoy nature and some quiet time outside. So first one is Freeway Park. You may be a little surprised that I'm suggesting that, but it's actually a really great place to connect with nature downtown. And right now with this pandemic, there are just so many fewer office workers downtown, so it's very quiet in the whole downtown area. So it's a good time to visit Freeway Park. The neighborhood association at Freeway Park has done an amazing job in the past couple of years of just like really activating and making this a really fun public space. There's cool seating areas. There's a lot of really nice plants and trees. There's even art. Before the pandemic, they had just like a really lively schedule of music and activities, and they've had to back off on some of those right now, but it's still a great park to go downtown. And it's also just got some cool history. It was built in the 1970s, and it was one of the first parks in the country to be built over the top of a freeway. So now that's a little bit more common, but at the time that was very revolutionary. That had almost never been done before. And part of what doing that allowed is that it reconnected the First Hill and the downtown neighborhoods, which were disrupted when I-5 was built. So now you have this pedestrian walkway and all this green space above the freeway. Well, sometimes great parks are just hidden from us. This is one of my favorite parks, Thomas C. Wales. It is on Queen Anne and right by Highway 99, but you would never guess it. It is actually a very quiet spot that's also a wetland. And it's a really cool example of using materials that you find on site. So this was a former rock quarry, and you'll see those rings. Those were created by the artist Adam Kuby. And so rather than just hauling all those rocks out of that space, they took them, and Adam created these amazing rings that look like they're suspended in the air. It's almost like a science fiction movie. And he also did something really interesting with them, and in the rock seating that's around the edges of the park. He left little spaces and nooks and crannies, cracks in the rocks, and those were done intentionally to serve as nesting spots for birds and other small critters. So while it's not a large park, it's actually had an important little role in bringing wildlife back to that space. And it's also rarely busy, so it's a really great park to visit because you can actually have a very quiet moment, even with Aurora so close by. Well, many people live in West Seattle their whole lives and have never been to Camp Long. And if you haven't, even if you don't live in West Seattle, it is worth enduring the lack of the West Seattle Bridge to come over and check out Camp Long. There's fantastic hiking, fall, winter hiking. It's a really nice place to explore, several miles of trails, and it's very quiet. It is closed on Sundays and Mondays, so that's something to think about before you head out, but otherwise it's a great place to visit. It was started more than 80 years ago as a scout camp, and then was turned into a public park in the 1980s. It's named after Judge William Long, who was one of the original advocates for the camp. One of my favorite things is that it has all these little cabins that you can actually normally rent when it's not the pandemic, and fire rings, and it has a beautiful old lodge. And most of those buildings were created in the 1930s as part of the WPA project. So that's kind of a cool little piece of history for our city. As you're exploring, you need to make sure that you do not miss seeing Sherman Rock. It is a 25-foot tall man-made rock climbing structure that was actually the very first in the country of its kind. So it was the first man-made rock climbing structure, and a lot of pretty well-known climbers actually used to practice on it, including Jim Whittaker. Well, if we're talking Seattle Park history, we need to go back to the beginning, and that is Denny Park. So this was our city's very first park. It was dedicated in 1884. And believe it or not, it actually served as our city's first cemetery before it became a park. So the graves were moved up to Capitol Hill, and it was redeveloped as a park. And 1884, our city was still pretty young, so it's kind of interesting that they were already setting aside land for park, and that they felt that this spot was so important that they needed to actually move the cemetery. Denny Park is named after David Denny, one of our city's founders. And it's actually a really nice place to experience nature downtown. It can be quite busy during normal times because there's so many South Lake Union office workers down that area, but now it's pretty quiet because so many people are working from home. What I really like about it in terms of nature is that it has the biggest stand of old trees in the whole downtown area. And for a park that's not that large, there's a really great variety of trees. So if you're someone that really enjoys looking at and identifying old trees, this is definitely something to check out. Another really cool park that I find most people have never heard of is Chinook Beach Park. This is down in the Rainier Beach area. And until about 2004, it was just a parking lot, kind of an eroding slope, a concrete bulkhead, and the city totally renovated and revamped the park. And now it's this beautiful, peaceful shoreline. The several times that I've been there, I've never seen anybody else there. So it's really a lovely secret little spot. And there's a special thing in terms of nature at this park as well. Chinook Beach Park is very close to both Mapes Creek and the Cedar River. And those are both places that we are working hard to bring salmon back. And so this park has very shallow offshore kind of rocks. And so it makes a really good place for the salmon as they're returning and also as the young are going out into the waterways. Well, we are lucky to, of course, as Seattleites, have so many off-leash areas, and I'm sure that people have appreciated still being able to exercise their dogs during this pandemic. But I like to point out North Acres Park because it's a little bit unique. Rather than having a really large open area where you can just play fetch with your dog, instead it has some small wooded trails that you can actually kind of take like a little urban walk with your dog. So they can be off leash, you can just be enjoying these beautiful deciduous trees. It's a nice spot in the fall. It's also nice on a hot day because the whole park is covered with some really nice tall trees, and there's also some picnicking areas just outside of the off-leash area. Well, I always like to talk about art as well because I think that art and nature just intersect so well. You know, Olympic Sculpture Park is obviously world renowned for the way it, you know, displays art in a natural setting. But a lot of people are surprised to hear that we have more than 130 pieces of art scattered throughout our park system. And one that I think is really interesting and cool is in Beersheba Park, which is also in the Rainier Beach area. This is a 21-foot tall sculpture by the artist John Graudet, and it is placed in a very specific spot. Several years ago, the Parks Department of the city took the Mapes Creek, which begins in Kubota Garden a few miles away, which most people are probably familiar with Kubota Garden. And then the Mapes Creek runs underground in pipes all the way until this particular spot where it is now daylighted thanks to this renovation. So this sculpture marks that spot as a place where we're taking art and returning a site to a more natural state. And as I mentioned before with the salmon, the natural plantings and the daylighted stream really help to bring the salmon back. I should also say that, you know, Beersheba is named in honor of one of Seattle's sister cities. And we have 21 sister cities, and we actually have several parks in Seattle that are named after those cities. And there are a couple of places where our sister cities have named things in honor of Seattle. So there's a Seattle Garden and a monument and a park in other places in the world, which is kind of cool to think about. Another cool set of parks is our Frink and Leschi, and I put them together because they're adjacent, and they're really nice places to go for a fall or winter hike. Lots of beautiful deciduous trees, so it's nice as the leaves are changing. And it's also an historic place, especially at the Leschi end of the park, which goes down all the way to the water. That was first a seasonal settlement for the Duwamish tribe. And then more than 100 years ago, it was developed, and if you can picture this, if you know Leschi Park, so imagine this. There was a zoo, a casino, a dance pavilion, there was a cable car that carried people up the hillside. So it's just kind of mind-boggling to think about that was all there 100 years ago. Most of it is gone. Today, there are just still some of these beautiful historic bridges, which you can still see. So that's kind of what remains. And as I mentioned, there's a great trail system. You can kind of wind your way through the trees. And I always encourage people to look for the secret waterfall that you can spot if you find the right trail. Well, one more West Seattle park that I really love is Jack Block Park. It's really unusual and an interesting park. It's actually owned and maintained by the Port of Seattle, so it's not a Parks Department park. And it was formerly a very contaminated industrial site, and then that a couple decades ago, it was completely renovated, and now it's just a very fascinating place. It has a long paved path, but it's not like a straight path. It's like it takes you around different corners and up and down bridges. And as you kind of wind your way through this park, you see something different around every corner. And you also get little hints of all the port activity that still takes place down there and then that used to many years ago. You are rewarded at the end with this really cool viewpoint. When you're standing there, you're actually 40 feet above the beach. And of course, you have this incredible view of downtown Seattle. It's also a great place for wildlife. There's a beach that you can go down onto. And throughout the park, you can often spot a lot of different birds. I've seen eagles down there. And it's also a good place to try to see sea lions. Or actually, usually you hear them before you see them. There are a lot of old pilings and docks in the water, and so the sea lions like to rest up there, and so you can try to catch sight of them. And my last park that I want to share with you is called Fremont Peak Park. It's up in North Seattle, of course. And this is a really cool park that was formerly several residential lots that were just adjacent to each other. And one day a neighbor was walking by and saw that they had all gone on the market at the same time. They had the same owner. And he sort of stopped in his tracks and said, this used to be a park, and really worked with the community and Parks Department and local businesses, and they rallied and raised the funds, and more than 100 volunteers helped design and build and plant and then water everything in this park. It's got some really nice tall trees, so there's peaceful places to hang out, enjoy some nature. Also has some really cool art that kind of hint at Fremont as the center of the universe. Well, I always like to just close with a little moment to think about why parks matter. And I think that this, again, is more important than ever as we are dealing with so many additional stresses and worries. And I have just been happy to see that they are still gathering places. You know, we have to gather carefully. We can't gather in large groups, but I've seen so many scenes similar to this. This was taken before the pandemic, but with people enjoying parks, you know, at two ends of a picnic blanket or set 6 feet apart in chairs in small groups. And, you know, outdoors is still one place that is safer to be. So parks really allow us to gather safely. And they just also kind of draw us out again of our monotony and out of our homes and our home offices. Parks also allow us to experience play, and joy is so important right now too. They are places to escape and a respite from our really busy city life. They're also centers of our communities. You know, this was also taken pre-pandemic, but I really love what Occidental Square has done to just really, you know, revitalize the Pioneer Square area, just really create a sense of place. And I know that will return. And, you know, the way that we are using our parks right now has had to change. So we, you know, have had to close playgrounds and swimming pools and stop large gatherings and all those things. But I think we can feel lucky that we have our park system, and I think we can just enjoy the way we can be out in our parks right now. And then, you know, one day we will be able to enjoy moments like this again. So before I wrap up, I just want to share a few resources. As Todd mentioned, my book, Discovering Seattle Parks, covers more than 100 of what I consider to be the best parks. They're my favorites. I think kind of the most interesting and unusual parks worth visiting. My book is available at pretty much every local bookstore, so I really encourage you to support your local bookstore. Also available online in many places, including Mountaineers Books. My blog I set up, you know, many years ago as a resource, and it now has more than 500 parks that I have personally visited and taken the pictures for. And I try to add new parks all the time. As life gets busy, it gets difficult, but you can search. It's a good way to just find a new park. You can search in a lot of different ways by region or by the type of park you're looking for if you want to find trails. So that could be a good thing to check out. If you have kids or grandkids, I really encourage you to join our Facebook group. We've got more than 1,000 members, and it's just a fun place to share ideas and resources and, you know, throw out a question to the group and have some people share some of their thoughts. So everybody is welcome to join that. We're always looking for new families. Another resource for families that's really relevant as we're going into fall and winter is the 52 Adventures with Kids book by Parent Map, edited by my friend Elisa Marie. And I was so grateful to be asked to be one of the writers to contribute to this really cool little book. It is a 4-season guide, so it is perfect for trying to figure out what to do with kids in fall and winter. And many things are still, super relevant to what's going on right now, being able to still be outside and do some outdoor activities. And then, there are so many awesome organizations out there, and I can't name them all, but throwing out a few that I think are really worth mentioning. And I think part of being outdoors and being comfortable in the outdoors is just finding your people and find who you feel comfortable with. And also these organizations are just doing awesome work in making the outdoors more welcoming and accessible for everybody. So Outdoor Afro, Latino Outdoors, Outdoor Asian, Women Who Hike is also a great resource. Outventures is a resource for LGBTQ folks and their families getting outside. Seattle Olmsted is a really cool resource if you've never checked it out. It was really fantastic when I was writing my book. It's all about the history of Seattle's Olmsted parks. So if you're kind of a history nut and you're interested in parks history, which I am, that's a fun one to check out. Of course, the Washington Trails Association is great, and they also have provided a lot of recommendations on how to be outside safely during this pandemic. And then, of course, the Parks Department, Seattle Parks Department, and Seward Park Audubon are fantastic resources as well. And then I've just been doing a lot of reading, extra time during the pandemic, and just a passion to just see what other people have to say out there. So these are just a few of my favorite books that I've read in the last year or so, both about how to get kids outside, especially really recommend There's No Such Thing as Bad Weather. That's a great book. And then also just some books on the importance of nature and the importance of addressing the equity gap in nature. So those are some fun books to check out. Well, thank you so much for joining me. We're gonna launch into the Q&A. You can find me on a bunch of different places on social media if you would like to stay in touch. So I'm always curious to hear what other people's favorite parks are, and you're welcome to join our Facebook group on Outdoor Childhood as well. Well, thank you, and I think Todd is gonna start with some questions.
But wow, thankfully, thank you so much, Linnea. It's always a little overwhelming to think about all the knowledge that you have of being out there in the parks, in all the parks, and all the time with kids. As a fellow, parent of twins and another, I understand what that means. So I guess first off, I just want to say thank you for your dedication. You've created a host of resources that can help everyone get outside, and that is so critical, as you mentioned right now. And thank you for the presentation tonight. I really do appreciate it, and I'm sure we all do. And speaking of kids, I did gather some questions to start off with, and I want to thank everyone for the questions that have come in on the chat. Please feel free to add more, and I'll take a look at those as we go through. But the first one is going to go to my youngest son, who is 8 right now, and he wanted to know, not the typical question of what is your favorite park. I will not ask you, nor will I ask that question of other people. I think that's very unfair because there's so many great parks. I'm a little biased, but I am curious from his perspective. He said, "What park did you visit today?"
Oh, that is a really good question. Let's see, what did I do today? I walked my neighborhood, but I don't think I visited a park today. I think the most recent park that I visited was yesterday, and I went down to Lake Washington, and actually, I'm a big fan of swimming in Lake Washington. So I was down walking Lake Washington Boulevard and swam in the water down there, sort of close to Genesee Park. So that would be my most recent park. But I tend to go to Lincoln Park about every other day. So that's my other frequent park.
Great. Well, I'll let him know. So you mentioned the benefits of being out in nature, and they're so well documented. In fact, the Children in Nature Network has a list of resources on their website that includes, I think, almost 1,000 journal articles that have been peer-reviewed that document the benefits of nature, some of which you described. So it is very well documented. One of the things that has often come up is there a difference between the type of nature that you get, or the extent, or the dosage, as it's often called, of nature? And I'm curious, as a local expert on urban parks, but also someone who's engaged in the benefits of nature beyond that. Do you think that there is there's a difference in the benefits from nature in an urban setting, such as in a city park, or in more wilderness or rural setting?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question, because I think because we all do live in a city that is, you know, maybe not as dense as New York City, but we're still in an urban area. The way I see it is that I really believe that all outdoor time counts. It is all good time, especially for kids, but it benefits all of us to be outside. So I think if that means that you're taking a walk in your urban neighborhood in the evening and you're walking on sidewalks, I think there is a ton of value in doing that. And you can actually still experience nature by seeing the trees that are on the street, by stopping and looking at bugs, by just enjoying hopefully fresher air than the smoke tonight. So I think that in terms of getting outside, it all is important. That said, I think there has been a lot of research showing that the more natural of a setting that you're able to get, the kind of the bigger dose of the benefits. And I sort of did like a one-person research study on this. After I read some of that research about a year ago, I sort of changed the way I walked. I'm like an everyday walker. I have to get outside. It's how I kind of clear my head. And I used to really just walk the sidewalks and neighborhoods, and I enjoy just kind of seeing what people are out doing. But I started intentionally going more to parks like Lincoln Park and other places where I could really be more among the trees. And it was interesting to see that I found myself calmer and more relaxed, less stressed with the more time I spent in those types of parks. And I believe that that's backed up with the research. And I think it's sort of a continuum. I think, you know, a lot of us can't get out to the national parks often or can't go hiking, and that's just not a reality, either because we're busy or we've got kids that we can't take along, or maybe we have a disability and so a hike isn't going to work. So I think there's value in all that. But then that said, you know, I think when you do get out into true wilderness, like our national parks or other places, I think there are a lot of additional benefits of that. So sort of a long-winded answer to say, I think being outside, it all counts. But try for yourself and just see kind of what it feels like to you. But to me, it feels like the more we're in a natural setting, the bigger the health benefits that we reap.
Thanks. Yeah, I think getting out is so important. I know at Seattle Parks, we worked really hard to ensure that those spaces are available for people, especially now, to be used and to gain those benefits that are out there. So thank you for recognizing that. And one of the questions that earlier came on, I think you've addressed, but it's just where can I get more description or a list of these parks? And you've listed many of those resources, whether it's your book, your blog, or the park's website. There's lots of resources there to find it. Go to Google Maps and look for that green space and see what it is, and then just go explore, would be my answer.
Yeah, and actually I love Google Maps. I mean, and so a quick funny story is that I'm a sort of a late tech adopter. So when I did most of my blog, I actually did not have a smartphone. So I would print out copies of Google Maps and I would drive to a neighborhood and like walk the neighborhood and visit like 6-7 parks at the same time. And I remember like, you know, it was raining and like my pen marks were like running off of the paper and I couldn't see where I was going. And then I realized like this would be a lot easier with a smartphone. But I love Google Maps for just saying like, what is that green space? I mean, when I travel to new cities, I'm always like, where are the parks? Where are the green spaces? I got to go see what that is. Like, what's that jutting out into the water? So I think that's a really fun way to find a new park in your neighborhood.
Well, I know we only have so much time today. And one of the issues that I really wanted to address was also, in addition to the pandemic, we have large conversations on racial issues, on white supremacy, and kind of what we do to shift that culture that we have created over the past. And we also know in our city and in many places, there are huge disparities in who is accessing parks. And so one of the things that I wanted to ask you were just any thoughts you had. You've been out all over the city in different times. And how do you think that we might be able to make parks more welcoming to people from different cultural backgrounds? Have you had any conversations with folks or other things that would give you some sense on what we can do to make parks more welcoming for everyone?
That's super important. I think the most important thing is to talk to communities and especially to talk to young people and ask them those very questions. What would make you feel more comfortable in this park? I know the Parks Department does a lot of outreach when they're creating new parks. And I think, and there's a lot of great organizations, including Seward Park Audubon, that are really working to try to get, you know, folks of all different backgrounds out into nature. And because many people do not have a backyard or have, you know, limited outdoor space, which is something that is really pronounced right now with this pandemic, that we've got kids that don't have a lot of easy access to the outdoors. So parks is critically important. So talking to those communities, making them, you know, feel welcome, but asking them and letting them share that insight, and really doing smart parks planning, where we are really thinking about the community and how spaces are being used. A really quick example of that is that, you know, many years ago, there was really a backlash across the whole country, not just in Seattle, about skateboarding and keeping, you know, kids out of parks to skateboard. And that has started to shift. And I think that's just an example of, you know, taking a moment for us all, especially as adults, you know, to step back and say, like, well, why do we not want kids skateboarding in a park? Isn't that a safe activity for them to be doing? There's so many other alternatives. So just kind of looking at all the different ways that we use our parks. I'm also a big believer in making sure that teenagers feel welcome in parks. And I think that one thing that adults can do is they can smile at teenagers, they can say hello, and they can make them feel acknowledged and welcome in our public spaces. We shouldn't be suspicious because there's a bunch of teenagers in a park. It is just as much their space as anybody else's, and we want kids to be in parks. That's a healthy, great thing for them to do.
You know, it's interesting. There was a recent report that came out from the UW called State of Play, which is fascinating. It was King County based, but one of the things we learned is that parents, they want to send their kids out to parks alone, but they don't really feel comfortable with it. But they would feel comfortable if other parents did that. So they're getting this cycle that does not support getting kids outside in nature as much. And there's a lot of layers to peel from that, of course. But I'm curious around the question of what sometimes is called free-range parenting, or kind of letting your kids go down to the park. Something that, you know, people that are, you know, my age or older might have done very readily in their childhood, but it's not seen as common or as acceptable now. What are your thoughts on letting your kid run down to the park and playing a game of soccer or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the childhood that we want for our kids, and many of us had that sort of childhood. I think there's a couple things. I mean, one is that there is perceived safety issues, and some of it is not really reality. So there's really been a heightened fear around like child abductions and things like that, which are incredibly rare, but they get hyped by the media, and so parents get very afraid. But then there are also like real fears. Like there are neighborhoods where kids and families don't feel safe, and that's real and legitimate and needs to be addressed so that those parks are safe places. And one thing that we can do is we can activate those parks with programs, either through the city or other nonprofits, so that there are adults and activities in the parks. And then I think it's also just about like letting your child have a little bit at a time. So we've actually started this with my 11-year-old this summer, letting him bike about a mile to meet up with friends at what we consider to be a pretty safe park, where he knows where he can go to a couple houses if there's an emergency. And, you know, we kind of like, first I let him bike and I would kind of like see him off or watch him bike away and make sure he was doing it safely. And now I trust that he can do it. He's been fine. So, you know, finding other families that you can do it with. And like you said, it is a snowball effect. The more that we are in our parks and we have our kids in our parks, the safer it will be overall. But then as a society and a community and a city, we also do need to address safety issues like how kids get there. So there need to be safe ways for them to walk or bike. And we need to make sure that parks are safe from all sorts of things like needles, which parents bring up a lot, and other things like that. So some real legitimate safety concerns, and then also just a lot of that parental fear that sometimes we have to overcome ourselves and say like, okay, we're gonna let them go.
Yeah, it's a complicated issue. I recognize that, so thanks. Well, they've had a number of different questions that have come up. One that popped through related to wildlife. So obviously in an urban setting, parks are one of the places where wildlife live, roam, eat, and escape. You know, they might come up in your garbage can or in your neighborhood and to eat your cat that is eating other birds. But, you know, in addition to kind of coming in our spaces, there's a lot of wildlife out in parks. And I know that Richard Louv's recent book was about that connection to wildlife, not just to nature, but specifically to animals. So what value do you see in having parks as a place to connect to wildlife, whether it's birding, as you mentioned, or other forms of life?
Yeah, I mean, one thing is that we're lucky in Seattle to have so much land for parks and so many green connection places so that animals do have these, passageways where they can connect between parks. If you don't have that, you just don't tend to have coyotes, which we have in Seattle, or raccoons or other critters, or even owls. And so having that space, we're so lucky to have. I think that, connecting with animals is really important. And I think it's a great thing to start early with kids. There's so much in the environmental movement right now about teaching kids about climate change and pollution and all the terrible, scary things that are happening, which are, real and scary. But I just am such a big believer that if we're gonna raise sort of the next generation of environmentalists, we need to teach them to love nature. And I think that animals is such a great way to do that, because kids are naturally drawn to them. They enjoy zoos and aquariums and other places where they can see animals. And, then a lot of kids don't get to go to a park and experience, animals in nature. So again, organizations like Seward Park Audubon that do owl walks and other critter walks are great ways to just encourage families to get out and to look for signs of squirrels or signs of raccoons maybe, or listen to bird calls. That could be a really, fun thing to do. So yeah, really, really important, and a really great way to connect to our parks.
Well, and yeah, obviously we should absolutely plug Audubon, and the reason, aside from being the host and having been on the board and other places, that birds are so accessible, right? Birds are all around us, even in an urban setting. And I've had to get over some of my biases against things like starlings and other birds that I find to be more invasive and not as natural in my preconceived mind. But they are fantastic, and they really do connect you to that world and show you that when that rufous hummingbird shows up, it's traveled from Central America to come back this summer. There's a story there to tell. And it's not just look at that cool bird, but it's let's understand why it's here, what it needs, where the rest of its life was. And I'm lucky enough to live near Seward Park, and in the spring and the fall, seeing the murder of crows flying over, hundreds and hundreds of crows flying over to go to their evening roosts, is just a marvel that even in a city has huge power. So yeah, I agree. And Linnea, I'll just give you one little birder thing. That slide at the Japanese Gardens, that was a great blue heron. The birders call it a GBH, for short, if you're keeping your list.
I was like ballpark guessing heron, but.
But there are other herons that exist in the city as well, including, I've seen some great pictures of a green heron down at the Urban Horticulture Center. So get out there and check it out, even in those strange places. Well, we have about 10 to 15 minutes left here that I'd like to wrap up. We do have a few questions that have come in. One of them relates to the year. Seattle is a very wet place often, and I know that whether it's cold up in further areas further north or east, in other parts of the world, and you get a lot of snow, or it's rain, or maybe just extreme heat in some areas, there are often environmental and weather factors that will keep people from going outside or feeling comfortable going outside. I remember back in my earlier days when I was in an environmental ed camp up in the North Cascades, we always use the little jingle, whether the weather be hot, whether the weather be cold, we'll weather the weather, whatever the weather, whether we like it or not. And aside from being a tongue twister, it was a way to remind the kids that, it's a state of mind in a lot of ways. The other phrase was, there's no such thing as bad weather, only inappropriate clothing. So, and I'd add on to that, sometimes it's good to be wet, like it's you're not gonna die if you're wet for an hour. You'll come back and you'll take your clothes off, and as long as you have shelter, right? And so I'm curious, what advice do you have for people in general, in particular parents, but just anyone, for enjoying our parks and the outdoors during those weather situations that may not be as pleasant as a spring or crisp fall summer day, crisp fall day where the sun's out and the leaves are falling. Like, how about when it's January and it's 39 degrees and raining? How do you enjoy parks then to get your vitamin in?
I actually think that there are some really cool ways that you can enjoy parks in the fall and winter that are sometimes more special. So some of my favorite moments in parks have been on, days with terrible weather. We went to a birthday party several years ago in a torrential downpour at Lincoln Park. And the family had just gotten a bunch of food, and we had a fire in the fireplace down at Lincoln Park. There's an old WPA fireplace that we've since used regularly to make fires. And it was just the most amazing birthday party. The kids were all in rain gear. They were playing in and out of, the parents could be under this structure. And it was like a magical moment. And so since then, I just have really rethought I love summer. It's my favorite season. I love swimming and being outside, but there are just so many really cool ways that you can enjoy being outside in our parks. Just doing those kind of creative things, like making a bonfire down at the beaches that allow it, having a picnic at a park. There are still shelters that you can use, and most of the year during the fall and winter, those are just open to anybody that shows up. So they don't even take reservations, and they're almost always empty. So you can have those available. You just put on lots and lots of layers. So that's what I would say is you've got to have the right gear, and footwear is really important. Rubber boots are not that expensive, especially for kids. And if you just put on your layers and you rethink the way you experience the outdoors, and you either as an adult change your mind about it, or you share that with your kids, it just becomes something that you do. We go camping year round. We go out to the coast and stay in yurts in February and March, and our kids just kind of think that that's normal, and we just have them in the right clothes, and they just think that it's fun, and we have a good time, especially if there's other families that want to do it. So finding people that also enjoy being outside, year round, having the right clothes, lots of layers, staying warm, and then just finding cool and unusual things to do. There are a lot of people that swim year round in Puget Sound down at Alki, which is just amazing to me. I mean, the water's cold all the time, and they're going in, when it's 32 degrees. But there's also, really fun polar bear plunges you can be part of on January 1st. There's cool runs and bike rides and owl prowls and so many different things that are either organized or that you can organize yourself. Just different fun ways to get outside. And I think you can also kind of experience that magic of being in a park when almost nobody else is there, and just feeling that experience. A couple of years ago, it was really bad weather, and it was during the week, and I was walking the shoreline path at Lincoln Park, and there was nobody around. And it took me a minute to realize it. And I was standing there, I said, I think I am the only person in this 150 plus acre park at this moment in this big, busy city. And that is just such a cool thing to get to experience.
Well, here's one that gets almost political, and we'll stay away from the politics of it, but I am curious. There's been a conversation around golf courses that have come up in kind of within Seattle, and those are big open spaces that are out there right now that are utilized for a specific sport. And of course they have different ecological benefits and things of that nature, but there is a fee to access them. And so people wonder, what is the best use of this space? And I'm curious, as we think about our city, and there's another question related to density and apartment buildings and the importance of open space. Do you have any thoughts on just those large open spaces that are utilized for specific purposes, and how that works into this idea of having connection to nature in the city?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tough one. I know that there have been a lot of people, on both sides of that issue, because there are a lot of passionate golfers as well. And I think what's important is really to try to listen to everybody, and to try to assess as a city what our priorities are. So how heavily used are those spaces? What are the underutilized areas? Are there other underutilized parks or areas that could be used in a different way? There's a lot of land in the city that there's potential for other park development in certain places. And then also just, with increased density, I think one thing that we can really do is urge developers to make as much of their space around their buildings open to the public. That's one thing that I've seen a lot sort of around South Lake Union and that end of kind of Belltown, where a lot of the new buildings going in have like public plazas with seating. There's a new public small dog park right by the spheres, Amazon spheres. And so that's another way to squeeze in little bits. It's not the same as having a huge park, but there is a lot of benefit to just having little outdoor spaces everywhere. And I'm also I think that it's really interesting to just look at kind of like micro parks. There's places where the city has taken like parking spots and turned them into little mini parks. And that's a really creative way to look at space, because if we've got an underutilized parking lot or an underutilized, set of parking spaces, why can't that be, 3 bistro tables or a bocce ball court? So there's lots of different ways we can just like activate all those sorts of spaces and create kind of fun, interesting places for us to be outside.
Well, I do have another question connected to that, but I just want to let everyone know that we have about 5 minutes left. So if you do have any additional questions, please put them in the chat now so that I can take a look at them and pass them along to Linnea. But tied into this question, I'm curious, since you've been around the whole city, you've experienced it, you've looked at the maps, you've had many conversations around parks in Seattle. Are there places within the city that you think there still needs to be a park? A place where you'd say, like, I think that we need a little more green space there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that map that I showed at the beginning kind of shows where there are a lot of parks, but we also need to look at sort of where do people live, where is their density. There are areas that really have very few parks, and there are still people that live there. So Soto and Georgetown could use more parks. South Park has actually some great little parks. That's a great neighborhood to explore. It's getting overrun with traffic right now with West Seattleites trying to get through, but that's an area that could use more redevelopment and more attention, especially with all this additional traffic. There are parts of South Seattle that also have pretty big gaps between areas of parks, and also just kind of this activation, park space. So there's different types of values in parks, but if you just have a square of grass and nothing else, that doesn't necessarily have the same value as a space that is really welcoming and inviting, with something that maybe teenagers can go do, like play bocce ball, or a really nice accessible picnic table where somebody can roll in a wheelchair and enjoy that space. So I think there's a lot of neighborhoods, like many that I've mentioned, including a few places in North Seattle that have, that kind of are in need of some more park space as well. So just looking at kind of where should there be green space, and then also where are we lacking like the amenities that the community really wants. And then that goes back to, of course, listening to those communities and asking them what they need and want.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not just having the space, it's access to that space first. And then secondly, it's what is in that space. And then do people feel welcome? So there are, in addition, many layers to this, onions and onions of layers. There was an article today in the paper, in the Seattle Times, that the headline was catching, as they often are, which was talked about recreation, not recreation. So rec as in you had a car wreck. Now, are we overusing parks? And I'm curious, in an urban setting, during a time when there is increased need and use of these urban parks, do you think there is a danger of overusing parks? And attached to that question, and then we'll have time for maybe one more after this, but attached to that question of are we overusing parks, how can we, as members of the public, as people who care and are passionate about parks and nature and connection to nature, how can we utilize our parks in a respectful way that does not cause wrecking or overuse?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of park space, like I said, about 12% of the land, but we have, 650,000 people just in Seattle and many more in the surrounding area. So, we're not the densest city, but we have a lot of people who live here. So I think, I believe that there is space for everybody to spread out and to enjoy our parks. I think that we can overuse them, especially particular ones. But I see more, rather than like the erosion of trails and things like that, which does happen, I think the biggest problem is around litter and just sort of the small number of people that are disrespectful in our parks. I've been to lots and lots of parks during this pandemic, and for the most part, I've seen people being pretty respectful. But there are a few places, and one place is some of our school playgrounds, actually, because they're not being as closely monitored right now, but are still getting used by communities because they are open spaces. Some of those places I've seen just a lot of garbage, and that's unfortunate. So I think as communities, we need to like really own our neighborhood parks and say, we want to take care of this park. We expect you to clean up your trash. You know, we need things to be cleaned up. We need trash to be taken away, which I think the parks folks have done an awesome job of trying to stay on top of all the maintenance through all this too. But I think there needs to be a lot of community ownership, and maybe, you know, more, there are a lot of people right now that actually have extra time on their hands. It would be cool to have like a volunteer corps of people who are helping to make sure our parks are clean and being used safely during this pandemic.
I appreciate that idea, and it brings up the last question that we have here, I think, before some closing comments that I'll offer you as well as Joey. But the one question that came up actually earlier, it was more of a comment that mentioned the Chief South Trail as a really great place to get out there, kind of underutilized. There's power lines, but it's open and long. You can walk. There's a good place for strolling. And one of the things they mentioned was also picking berries. You know, great. Often it's a great place for blackberries. And along with that, the question that just came up had to do with a place for gleaning fruit and other food that's out there. And I wondered, I mean, I could comment, but then do you have any suggestions on places to go? My quick comment was that I do know we were hoping to launch a large citywide program to gather volunteers together to go and collect fruit off of the, I think it's about 700 fruit trees that are in Seattle Parks and Recreation land. But we do have some limitations on gathering people for volunteer work right now for obvious health reasons. However, if you see fruit trees in parks, we encourage and welcome you to go and pick some fruit. So just go to a park that has a fruit tree and look for some good ones. And Linnea, I'm curious if you have any favorite spots to go and pick some berries or some heirloom apples.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm glad that you're sharing that the Parks Department encourages that, because I think a lot of people don't know, can I pick an apple in a park? I mean, I think people assume that blackberries are fair game because they're such weeds. But it's good to just share that, you know, there are a lot of places with plum trees and apple trees. Seattle actually has a lot of historic apple orchards or apple trees left from older orchards. And so that's really cool. A few places, the Beacon Food Forest, so up by Jefferson Park, is a very cool little kind of mini park attached to Jefferson Park down the west slope, where it's a combination of a pea patch, which is just set aside specifically for certain people to use, and then other beds which are actually open for picking. Really cool place to check out. The other place up is Meridian Park up in the Wallingford neighborhood. Great park for kids, really safe with like a big stone wall all the way around it. And it has an old orchard there, lots of apple trees, so good time of year to go. And so that's a really cool place to go pick. And then if you want to just see, I'm not sure how much fruiting they're doing anymore, but because I'm not sure that I've been during the season recently, but in Carkeek Park, there's this a very old orchard. It's over 100 years old. And it was actually only discovered a number of decades ago. It was completely overgrown, and some volunteers like found this magical orchard in Carkeek Park. So you're gonna have to go and look for that. And I do wanna mention one other resource. There's a really great, very small but mighty nonprofit called City Fruit. And they work very hard to provide access to fruit for people that are both on parkland, public land, and on private land. So if you have excess fruit on your property, they will actually bring volunteers out to pick it. And they actually do a lot of picking on public property as well. And then they also do cool things like teach you how to prune your trees and prevent pests and other things like that. So that's another cool way to connect with nature, is like, who doesn't like to experience a fresh blackberry or a bite of an apple? So I'm glad that question came in. That's really fun.
Yeah, and Seattle Parks and Rec has a program called the Urban Food Systems Program, which works with City Fruit and many others, Tilth and other partners, to try to help create opportunities for people to connect to their local food system as well, including right here in the city. So Just want to, oh, there we go. Joey's taking care of us on the chat. Thank you, Joey. Yeah, Carkeek Park is in Northwest Seattle, has a great salmon-bearing stream in it as well. A great time to go around this time of year and maybe see some salmon, which is pretty remarkable. I've had a chance to do that with my kids, and it's a long way from Southeast Seattle, but it's worth it. So, Linnea, I want to give you a chance. First off, again, thank you for your contributions to this space and for sharing them with us in this conversation tonight. It's always great to have friends. You choose your friends wisely, right? If we were having some sort of a horrible emergency or Armageddon, I would choose someone who had really good survival skills. As someone who loves getting outside in nature here in the city, I'm so glad that I know you and that you have provided these resources for everyone in the city and anyone who comes and visit as well. So thank you for sharing your knowledge, your experiences, and your perspective tonight with Seward Park Audubon Center and with all the community out there. I really appreciate it. And I want to give you a chance to offer any closing thoughts that you have tonight.
Well, thank you. That was so nice. Just really appreciate everybody joining us and all those great questions. That makes the conversation really fun. I always love hearing what people think about parks and want to know about parks. I could just talk about parks for hours and hours. So it's really fun to have this conversation. And just again, thank you, Todd, and thank you, Joey, and Seward Park Audubon Center. It's great to have these kind of conversations and things to think about and enjoy right now when there's so many difficult things that are happening in our communities and in our world. Having parks is such a resource and something that we can be really grateful for. So thank you.
You bet. Well, thank you for spending your evening with us tonight. The next online event will be on Thursday, September 24th. Charles Bergman will be sharing insights from his latest book, Every Penguin in the World. You can rewatch also tonight's presentation for free on the Seward Park Audubon Center Rewind page. So find Rewind and look for Seward Park Audubon Center, and that'll be available tomorrow morning. I also want to just thank Joey Manson. Joey is such a great resource for our community and has been an amazing leader at the Seward Park Audubon Center. He has been there not just as the director, but ran the store there for years, knows the place, knows the community, and he knows his birds. So I am not, like Linnea, I'm not really a birder. I just like to pay attention to everything, and sometimes I know what they're called. But Joey has learned the trade from the ground up and knows Seward Park and the city so well. And he also knows how to put on a heck of an event. So Joey, thank you for your leadership. Linnea, thank you for yours. To everyone, thank you so much for coming tonight and for sharing this conversation with us, which you can find on the Seward Park Audubon Center Rewind page starting tomorrow morning. And go check out the online resources, whether it's Year of Seattle Parks.com, thank you, or sewardpark.audubon.org, and learn more and get involved. Buy Linnea's book, donate to Seward Park Audubon Center, and keep this work going. Thank you very much. Have a great night.